Greetings, everybody, and welcome. This is our first live stream for the week, coming to you on a Wednesday, and it is coming to you with a series, or at least two, momentous events, and this is what we'll be talking about tonight. Firstly, the election victory, and then an attempted coup against President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and then the Israeli wave of assassinations and bombings that they've been carrying out in West Asia. So we're going to be getting to both of those, and if we've got time, we're talking about J.D. Vance and family values later on. And we will begin tonight, though, in Caracas, where over the course of the weekend just gone, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro won a new term in office in the Venezuelan presidential election. He got about 51% of the vote, and the opposition, so-called opposition, immediately cried foul and immediately decided that it was time for another attempt at a counter-revolution. Notice, by the way, that when discussing Venezuela and Iran, which is what we're going to be discussing in tonight's episode, I am no longer going to use the term color revolution. For reasons that I will go into in more depth in a moment. But I'm going to use the term counter-revolution because that is what US imperialism is into, is what it's attempting to do. And the people out on the streets in Caracas are counter-revolutionaries. So I'll explain my insistence on correct usage of terminology in just a moment. But what happened was this exactly what we could have predicted would happen, did happen, which is the starting pistol was fired by a certain Mr. Anthony Blinken, who apparently is something to do with foreign policy in the United States. I jest, of course. He is, of course, the Secretary of State, and he came out and said, "Oh, well, we have doubts about the Venezuelan election result." The scam that they were running this time, and it got found out pretty quickly, was that they commissioned a polling company called Edison to produce an exit poll which showed the opposition candidate in the lead, and they made sure that this was seen everywhere across various social media platforms, and this was then seized upon by the opposition to say, look, you see, we were ahead, and then when the votes were counted, we were behind. But of course, the firm that published this was, and indeed is, a polling company which has direct links to the Central Intelligence Agency. And the reason why US imperialism and their propagandists publish fake exit polls like the one they did there is precisely because they need a rationale for what is about to unfold, an attempted counter-revolution. So let's be clear. The people out in the streets attacking police stations and other public buildings in Venezuela, these are people who would have gone and done that anyway. The whole purpose of publishing the fake exit poll and then Blinken coming out and saying, "Oh, we have doubts," then all the slaves and compradors in the South American states came out and loyally followed their leader. So that contemptible wretch, Boric, in Chile, immediately came out and basically said he didn't believe the results of the Venezuelan election because he's just following his master's voice. And the clown, Milei, the traitorous clown Milei in Argentina, who it turns out has magically managed to disappear almost all of Argentina's gold reserves. The story is that he spirited it out of the country to put it in the Bank of England. A digression briefly, but every single thing that this wretched, contemptible, treasonous toad does, because he does resemble a particularly dyspeptic toad, has been designed to make sure that Argentina remains in bondage to US imperialism and the US imperialist bloc. As soon as he was elected president, of course, he didn't gain the presidency by genius campaigning. He did a sleazy deal with the existing right-wing forces, headed by Mauricio Macri, the former president. And then He promptly delivered the results that the Argentine ruling class and the parasites of US imperialism were looking for. And he attacked the working class, went to Washington to get his orders, and then delivered apparently Argentina's gold reserves to the vaults of the Bank of England, meaning that even if he is removed, even if he is justifiably driven from office by a mass revolt, much in the same way that Fernando de la Rua was all the way back in 2001, then the British imperialists have now got their hands on Argentina's gold, just like they got their hands on Venezuela's gold. Mistake by the Venezuelan government. They should never have trusted the British with anything particularly valuable anyway. But I'm sure the Venezuelans will learn from that mistake. With Milei, it's not a mistake, it's deliberate policy. So Milei has delivered Argentina trussed up and bound over to the US imperialists and has given the gold away. But he, of course, dutifully didn't recognize the election result and did his usual screaming hysterical performance, which you know very well, all that fake hardman act. If you just walked up to him and went on the nose squarely, he'd cry and shit his pants, like phony hardman, absolute deranged hysteric, a complete slave of US imperialism. And he's delivering a proud and often heroic proletariat into debt bondage in perpetuity. The sooner he is removed from office, the better. And sooner the Argentine ruling class are removed from power, the better. But that's another story. But of course, you also get the coup regime in Peru refuses to acknowledge Maduro's election victory, as does the fake pseudo-populist Bukele in El Salvador, who is always grateful for an attempt to shift any negative attention he's getting from US imperialism onto somebody else. And even in Colombia, there's been talk that the government is questioning the results, though quite how serious that is, I'm not sure. Only really Brazil seems to be holding a dignified position. I'm not sure what the position that Lula has taken on that yet. But the attempted counter-revolution in Venezuela, of course, begins immediately. Usual thing, gangs of fascists funded by, well, internal sources inside Venezuela, and of course external sources inside the United States, took to the streets and started demonstrating, started burning things down, attacking the public buildings. They pulled down a statue that was put up to an indigenous chieftain, I think, who came from the area. They hold down statues of Chavez. I mean, what these people, whatever their motivations, are doing is essentially they are pushing to return Venezuela to being under the full domination of US imperialism. That's what they're doing. Doesn't matter what they think they're doing. That is the practical impact of their actions. And this leads us to the contemptible role of the so-called Venezuelan Communist Party. A contemptible role because they came out and backed the opposition's campaign of fascist violence. Now this stems from a dispute between the PSUV, which is Maduro's party, and the PCV, which used to be part of the Chavez coalition. This dispute erupted a couple of years ago. The PSUV alleged that the PCV leadership, the Communist Party leadership, had basically become counter-revolutionary and tried to remove them. The PCV basically then decided to defect wholesale to the camp of the right-wing reactionary opposition. And they essentially now play the role of the left flank of fascism. That's what's happened. The former Communist Party of Venezuela has now defected to being the left flank of a fascist uprising. And in doing so, they have wholly gone down the road of Trotskyism. That's what they've done. Because this is what the Trotskyites did. When it came to the counter-revolutions that swept through Eastern Europe and then the Soviet Union, and of course the attempted counter-revolution in China in 1989, the Trotskyites backed all of this enthusiastically. The Venezuelan Communist Party is now doing the same thing. So it no longer deserves to be called a Communist Party. it is essentially a deeply corrupt gaggle of fascist sympathizers who have decided to go down a path that was first trod by the Trotskyites. They are part of an international organization which is led by now the abominable organization known as the Greek Communist Party, which has, in its pursuit of supposed ideological purity, though in reality just assuming an ultra-left position to, well, for reasons I'm not fully aware of, but I speculate it's because they find that very convenient for their positioning inside Greece. They have decided to take up what is an objectively pro-imperialist position when it came to the war in Ukraine. They said it was an inter-imperialist war between two imperialisms, Russia and the United States. We have covered very extensively on this channel why that is not the case, and modern Russia is not an imperialist power, though of course it is a capitalist nation these days. They have adopted an objectively pro-imperialist position when it comes to Ukraine and the war there between Russia and the US imperialist bloc. They have adopted an objectively pro-imperialist position when it comes to China, again following the Trotskyite line. And they now adopt, well, through the Venezuelan communists and the Mexican Communist Party, or the sad remnants of that, a pro-imperialist line when it comes to the question of the Bolivarian Revolution. So I can't emphasize this enough, that the KKE in Greece is responsible for the degeneration of large segments of what had been the pre-existing, pre-2022 international communist movement, have degenerated under the influence of the KKE. And this is what has happened to the Communist Party of Venezuela. It is now being the left flank for fascist coup plotters. And everybody should be absolutely clear about what that means and where the source of this grotesque deviation comes from. The source lies in the theories put out there by the Greek Communist Party, so especially over the last 2 years. Though in reality, it seems in my own party, through the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, has critiqued them and has tried to trace the origins of this degeneration. It seems to go back many years, at least a decade. But we should be absolutely clear on the degeneration of the Venezuelan Communist Party. I can only hope that a new Marxist-Leninist party emerges in Venezuela to play the proper part that a communist party should be playing in this ongoing process known as the Bolivarian Revolution. And the role of the PCV should be properly and thoroughly exposed for what it is, which is that they have sold themselves to the US imperialists and the comprador bourgeois in Venezuela. So, more on the KKE, I think, in future episodes. It's time to go through my party's critique of their position in more depth and the pernicious role that they play internationally. Fortunately, I think most of the global majority countries and their communist parties either don't pay any attention to them or just ignore their wretched line. And this is the result of years and years of degeneration where, because the KKE are very big, and I think they're the biggest surviving European Communist Party, they've kind of passed without criticism for years. Well, now the criticism needs to really be stepped up, because if you've got an international communist movement, which SolidNet to a degree still is, and the international organization that stands behind it, which is saying that not only is one of the most significant anti-imperialist revolutionary processes in the form of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution, saying that needs to be overturned in favor of what? The local compradors, the fascists, the US imperialists, because that's who would benefit from it. If that's their line, and if their line with regard to the war of anti-fascist resistance that was launched in eastern Ukraine, now western Russia, that is somehow pro-imperialist, that is an imperialist plot by the Russians. If that's the line of this major communist party, then that is contemptible and needs to be held up to proper and rigorous criticism. And you can't just hide behind repeating slogans from Lenin's work on imperialism completely out of context but without actually putting in any new study. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous what they have done now. But on to more positive news. I will return to the KKE and their crimes against Marxism-Leninism in future episodes. Now, the reason why, I mean, it appears so far that this attempted counter-revolution is failing. And it's failing because Nicolas Maduro and the PSUV leadership have done the correct thing, which is that they were ready for this. They anticipated what the so-called opposition was going to do. They held the election. And it was praised as transparent, even by fair and objective observers that have come from the United States. In fact, Venezuelan elections going back decades to the early Chavez era have been praised as very open and very transparent, even by like Jimmy Carter when he was still up and around. So they've always held very transparent, very fair and open elections in Venezuela. The problem that the US imperialists have with them is that their chosen man keeps losing. Now, the reason why the counter-revolution has, of course, failed is because over many, many years, the Venezuelan state has been strengthened against or fortified against counter-revolution, mainly by the role of the masses. Now, if you recall, it's a long time ago now, 22 years ago, when Chavez was first overthrown by a coup that was fronted by a guy who was the head of the Chamber of Commerce, I believe, a guy called, was it Toledo, who was president for like 24 hours when the army commanders overthrew Chavez and took him off to an island somewhere. It was the response of the masses and the immediate response of the masses that saved Chavez's life and presidency. Because prior to that, I mean, Chavez had been elected in 1999 as the head of a very broad coalition. And included all kinds of political forces, including at the time, I believe, what was once the Venezuelan Communist Party. And this was a sort of a broad candidacy that he was running, that was a sort of broad coalition for national renewal. But of course, as soon as he tried to do anything, 3 years into his first term, he was first elected 1999, so 2002, he's 3 years in, you get that infamous attempted coup, which is defeated because immediately the working class in Caracas comes out en masse and floods the streets of the capital and heads for the presidential palace, leading the 24-hour-long presidency of Toledo to fail, because immediately they see that if they try and crush this uprising, they're going to have basically an immediate civil war on their hands, and a civil war that they would probably lose due to the fact that the masses were up, they were organized, and they were enraged, and they were going to come into that presidential palace and tear the coup plotters to pieces. So this is the situation that occurred in 2002, and from that moment onwards, the role of the masses in the Bolivarian revolution increased exponentially. You got a more and more thoroughly developed series of neighborhood assemblies, popular assemblies that were directly elected by the masses, who were responsible for administering certain things in their neighborhoods. You got the formation of the defense squads in these coming out of these neighborhood assemblies that were organized and then started to be armed several years ago, because according to the advice that was received by both Chavez and Maduro from both Castro and the Iranians, because the Iranian revolution has always been, and Iranian revolutionaries have always been close to the government of Chavez and have always provided advice to him, and then Maduro, as to how to survive the counter-revolutions plotted by the US imperialists. They were advised to form their own armed organization, armed militia, based on the mass mobilization of the working class. So an organized and well-regulated and armed militia, in short, to use the American language. So the the fact that they were able to survive the 2002 coup and the multiple attempts that have come both during Chavez's life and afterwards to overthrow this government and reinstall one that is a comprador regime. They were able to do so precisely because of the incredibly strong links that they have with the great Venezuelan proletariat and peasantry. It is only because these masses remain organized and determined to defend the gains of the Bolivarian Revolution, which are very real in terms of the living standards of the working class, in terms of the access to healthcare that the working class has, the literacy rate, and a number of other important achievements that have gone not remarked upon in the bourgeois press, of course. The masses are determined to defend a process which they see as their revolutionary process, and have made it clear that they are prepared to endure all kinds of hardships that are imposed upon Venezuela by the sanctions regimes run by the imperialists, which even the Washington Post had to admit the other day was like the most extensive the world had ever seen thrown at countries like Venezuela. There's only slightly fewer sanctions on them than there is on Russia itself. So they survive all of this, and they survive this latest attempt at counter-revolution by the US imperialists that has been waged, precisely because, again, Maduro did the right thing, which is he immediately called upon the masses to rally to the defense of the revolution, and the masses did so. And as soon as the Venezuelan masses started assembling on the streets in an organized fashion, the fascist gangs apparently started to retreat. Because, again, as we've covered many times when we've talked about counter-revolutions, and I'll come to why I'm refusing to use the term color revolution anymore in a moment. They can only succeed when the masses are divorced from the government or are unable to be mobilized, when a big section of the state machine defects to the side of the counter-revolution, and when the external backing is big enough and powerful enough to provide a ruthless drive towards the elimination of the government in question. Now, because the masses are unified behind the Bolivarian revolutionary process, and because the Venezuelan government has, over the last 20 years, purged the military hierarchy of traitors and potential agents of US imperialism, what you've got there is the fact that the state forces remain aligned with the government. You have the masses on the streets defending the revolution, and you have the masses prepared to take up arms in the defense of that revolution. Now, when faced with that, and also the fact that the US imperialists aren't as powerful as they once were, their attempts at coups are getting less and less successful, you have a recipe for the failure of this attempted counter-revolution. Now onto the technical side, which is why I'm not going to use the words color revolution anymore. None of the things that none of the events that are described as color revolutions even deserve the moniker of revolution, because they're all counter revolutions. Even if it's overthrowing an oligarchic regime like Shevardnadze's regime in Georgia in 2003, the counter-revolution there was brought about precisely to destroy any lingering legacy of the old Soviet period. So it still deserves the title counter-revolution. Anything sponsored by US imperialism is going to be, by its very nature, a counter-revolutionary process designed to destroy sovereignty and independence of any particular nation. They all deserve the title counter-revolution. I would urge everybody to stop using the term color revolution, because that's their term. These are counter-revolutions. If the Navalnyists in Russia had succeeded in overthrow, or whoever the frontman would have been, the Khodorkovskyites had succeeded in Russia, then that would be a counter-revolution. I know this is about to fry some Trotskyites' brains, but the removal of the Putin system would be a counter-revolution. It would be a counter-revolution because it would objectively make the situation for the Russian proletariat much, much worse, and would turn Russia into a semi-colony of US imperialism. That's a counter-revolution. Okay. So I'm refusing to use the term color revolution from this moment onwards, just as I refuse to say that anybody who supports the continuation of the war against Russia using Ukrainians as its tool. I'm refusing to say that anybody like that is supporting Ukraine, because they are not. It's not about supporting Ukraine. As John Bolton himself admitted to recently, it's about American interests. More specifically, it's about the interests of the American ruling class. It's not about Ukraine. It is not about supporting Ukraine. None of these psychos in Britain support Ukraine. Boris Johnson doesn't. Keir Starmer doesn't. Rishi Sunak doesn't. They all support Ukrainians dying in gigantic numbers to to wage their outsourced war. But let's take a step back and look at this in positive terms, which is that thus far the Venezuelan masses are out to defend the Bolivarian revolution. The revolutionary process in Venezuela continues thus far, and the fascist forces have ended up weakening themselves, it seems. Just a word on a certain Mr. Elon Musk, because, of course, he has got himself into a lot of online trouble by supporting this counter-revolution in Venezuela, or attempted counter-revolution. A lot of people are acting surprised about this. Well, why are you surprised? Elon Musk, the people are saying, oh, has he been got at by the CIA? Is it this? Is it that? No, he's just a bourgeois. And he's just not an American, but because of course he's from South Africa. He's just a member of the American ruling class now. That's all he is. And the fact that he's got links to the CIA, well, links to the CIA, because that's how intelligence services operate in these imperialist countries. If you want to do business at that level inside an imperialist country, you have to be part of the very close network of finance capital, which, as we know from Lenin's work, is the merger of money capital and industrial capital to produce finance capital. Finance capital is, of course, very heavily integrated and almost merged completely with the state and with the state institutions. That's why there's almost no dividing line between the state institutions, particularly those of a repressive nature, and the bourgeoisie themselves as individuals. It's why the CIA runs a hedge fund, which Elon Musk has benefited from. And also, Musk makes a lot of his money from government contracts. So it's in his class interest that the coup in Venezuela succeeds, that the counter-revolution in Venezuela succeeds, and that he and other members of his class are able to loot the country and asset strip it to the bone. That's why he's in favor of this. It's not because the CIA's got pictures of him in flagrante with, on Epstein's Island or something. It's because this is where his interests lie. If you believed any of his advertising about him being some sort of free speech warrior, or, to use Richard Branson's old advertising slogan, a rebel billionaire, well, I'm sorry, but you got sold a faulty bill of goods. There's no such thing as a rebel billionaire. I believe he's a rebel when he gives all his money to fund the growth of the American Communist Party. There you go. If Elon signs over all of his money to and leaves it all to the American Communist Party, and then goes and lives a simple life in a shack somewhere, like, retreats like Henry David Thoreau did to live beside a pond somewhere in New England, then I'll believe that he's a rebel. Not until. So we will pause there before we get to the question of West Asia to take some comments. Right. Dr. Ahmed is with us, enjoying the Langley and Musk tears. Abtin joins us. Hero Protagonist joins us, as does Arnold, as does Michael and Robeson from Jakarta. Robeson says Viva Maduro, and Robeson is correct to do so. Almir is with us and says imperialists can't even do a proper coup anymore. I'll just put that comment on the screen, worth highlighting. DE, TG Wilson, Jerry, good evening to all of you. Alda Larkin, good evening to you. Rob and Beans joining us from the wrong side of the Pennines, but we don't take that too seriously. It is just a bit of regional rivalry for the benefit of our American viewers, though regional rivalries between counties inside England must seem very small fry to people from countries a lot larger. But trust me, the rivalries are bitter, and it's mainly over tea. Yes, in answer to your question, the study session we held this afternoon went very well. That was for the comrades from CPGBML, studying Lenin's free sources and component parts of Marxism. If you want to be part of CPGBML study sessions, you have to be, of course, mostly in Britain, and have to sign up as a supporter of the party. I would urge everybody who's watching this from Britain to do so. Jenny, good evening to you. And Anthony joins us from Prague, the capital of another particularly slavish US fiefdom. Almir says Guardian readers were trying to convince me that the fascist protesters are freedom fighters. Well, that's an old trick for Guardian readers. They've been saying that for 70, 80 years. I mean, the Guardian covered Hungary 1956 in that way, when the same thing was going on. They covered Prague 68 in that way, when the same thing was going on. Poland 80, 81, same thing. Everywhere in Eastern Europe 1989, same thing. Yugoslavia, same thing. The liberals always support counter-revolutions because, again, they're either slaves of the bourgeois ideology or bourgeois themselves. So the Guardian has been supporting fascist reaction since the days of the Bolshevik Revolution. Peter has joined us from Perfidious Albion and he's catching up on 2 times speed. Good to have you with us. Yes, and the liberals also say that sanctions is not the reason for the economic situation, but socialism itself. Well, isn't it strange how the great masses keep turning out in support of the Bolivarian revolution then? You know, and not just in terms of elections, in terms of their participation directly in the governing of the state. Right, where are we? Abolished NATO says, I was banned from the Telegram channel. I have no idea why. Well, you probably did something. I may set up an appeals channel for those who have been banned by accident, or those who want to issue an appeal. T.G. Wilson says, as Facebook was used to destabilize Syria over a decade ago, X is being used to attempt to do so now in Venezuela. Only difference is now that it's owner of the company, Elon Musk, who is doing it. Yeah, I mean, it'll reach a space where eventually, if they're not doing so already, the Venezuelans will have to heavily restrict or try and ban these social media companies. Just the same way that, like, Facebook is banned in the Russian Federation, and I believe is banned in China as well. They're just sources for the spreading of misinformation by counter-revolutionaries and by imperialists. So, and the senior men in those companies are directly involved in coup plots against you. So why not just go ahead and ban it? Alan asked a question about the Venezuelan Communist Party. I think I answered it comprehensively. If you feel I haven't answered it, let me know. Marius joins us and says, long live the Bolivarian Revolution. Indeed. T.G. Wilson makes the correct point and says, don't forget to hit the like button. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Almir says, Chinese must be looking at all these Western fake communist parties and just shaking their heads. Indeed. Marius says, Marxist-Leninists who have refused to update their theories over the last 30 years have become counter-revolutionary using orthodox Marxist-Leninist slogans as a cover. Well, I'd say they haven't updated their slogans in about 70 years, but your point is well taken and is correct. Irish Partisan says, the road that the PCV has made is identical to that of the Belarusian and Russian so-called Marxists and Trots who have been attacking Maduro. Some of them even met with Tikhanovskaya camp back in 2020. Tikhanovskaya is, of course, the female Juan Guaido of Belarus. Yes, I mean, these people are just a disgrace. No matter what problems you have with Putin or Maduro or Lukashenko, like, you don't need to look too far to see what the result will be of having the pro-imperialist comprador forces there. It'll be a disaster for the proletariat. And if you can't see that at this stage, having seen what's gone on in Ukraine, then you are just an agent of imperialism. Again, whether you're paid or not, that's what you're acting as. Greetings to Northern Comrade, who is catching the show live. Good to have you with us. Marius says there were communists who sided with the Contras in Nicaragua in the 80s. They literally allied with the neoliberals in the 1990 elections. Yep, there's no other word to describe those people other than traitors, which is what they are. Their reasonings will be conducted in, of course, ultra-leftist language. But I mean, if you can't see that the fight between the Sandinistas and the fascist counter-revolutionaries is one you should join decisively on the side of the Sandinistas, then you have either lost the plot, or again you are an agent of U.S. imperialism. Tim Gray says, a question: what is the point of playing the social democratic game of Western democracy? I fail to see the point of continuing to play the West's game. What is your take on this? Are you saying this in relation to Venezuela? It's an interesting question, and one that does come up quite a bit. I would say, first of all, bear in mind how this began, which is that this began with 25 years ago now, Chavez being elected on this broad reformist platform, which again has radicalized over the years. I would say that the question is raised as to why still bother going with bourgeois democracy. Why bother to keep doing this? I would say, first of all, the PSUV is still a broad organization with support from overwhelmingly its workers and peasants, but there are petty bourgeois elements who support it as well. It's not a Marxist-Leninist party by any stretch of the imagination. It is a party which is performing a very vital role in terms of pushing forward Venezuelan sovereignty and independence, and has a lot of socialists in it, and therefore the proletariat has been empowered by the PSUV's time in government. And the fact is, though, that again, it's not a full-blown Marxist-Leninist party, and therefore that is the central reason, one of the key reasons as to why, like, it remains in the stage that it is. I would say also that we should bear in mind that it would be incredibly difficult, not impossible, but incredibly difficult, to lead the kind of revolution that Castro led in 1959, 60, 61, 62 in Venezuela right now. Bear in mind, this process starts at the period of total collapse of world socialism. Like, Chavez's first attempted seizure of power happens in what, 92? And then 7 years later, he's elected as president. But again, like, he comes to power at a time when socialism and socialist movements have, again, never been weaker all over the world, at a time of a unipolar moment. And that is reflected in the way in which Venezuelan socialism goes about its business. The fact is that you have in Venezuela still a very extensive private sector. You have also a bourgeois there, some of which are comprador and traitorous, a few of which aren't. And so you have a complicated situation there, and you don't have the vast socialist center of world revolution anymore in the form of what the Soviet Union used to be. Now, bear in mind, people say, well, the DPRK survived this long. Why couldn't Venezuela seek a similar route? I would say that DPRK had the advantage of coming into its revolutionary process at a time when the Soviet system was incredibly powerful, and China had just gone through its revolution, and so was sat just over the border. The DPRK were able to do what they did in their way because they insisted on vigorously asserting their independence at all times. But they were able to rebuild after the siege warfare of the warfare waged upon them in the Korean War, because of extensive assistance from the Soviet Union in particular, but also the Chinese, who were just over the border. Like, none of those factors are present in the Venezuelan case. So you get a revolutionary process unfolding at a time when, again, like, the revolutionary forces all the way around the world have never been weaker. And you get a coalition leading a revolutionary process which is focused on, well, development of the country, but also the assertion of the country's independence and its slow breaking away from the US imperialist bloc. And that's what the focus has been on, which is, I think, that it's all those reasons as to why things are as they are. And now, if there was a communist party in Venezuela worthy of the name that would actually push for more revolutionary action, so for instance, it's certainly looks to me like the pro-fascist bourgeois can legitimately be arrested or have their property taken off them, or ideally both. It's legitimate. It looks legitimate to me under the existing laws of the state to arrest these ringleaders, to arrest the politicians who have been making calls for the overthrow of the state, like Machado, Elon Musk's favorite. So a communist party who would be in a consistent coalition with the PSUV should and would be making those demands in order to win the masses over to them. And I think that would be successful if done properly. But at the moment, no such communist party exists. And so you have the current balance of forces, which means the continuation of this hybrid model where you've got a bourgeois democratic element and you've got a workers' power element existing alongside each other. Spoke for a rather long time about that one. Anthony McKeown says, the left is derided for being fragmentary and divisive, and now you tell us the Venezuelan Communist Party is a gaggle of Trotskyite counter-revolutionaries. It doesn't... Hang on. It doesn't exactly inspire faith in the proletariat. I'm looking for the rest of your question because I know ideological purity seems more important than destroying capitalism. Tell me I'm wrong. It's not ideological purity which causes me to denounce the Venezuelan Communist Party. It's their actions. If anything, it's the Venezuelan Communist Party and the Greeks who are in pursuit of absolute ideological purity. That's why they argue that supporting the Bolivarian revolution, even though there remains significant capitalist elements there, isn't something that we should be doing. And in actual fact, that this revolutionary process should be stopped and overthrown. Now, what we do is we identify what Mao referred to as the primary contradiction each time. What is the primary problem facing all countries and all nations that want to fight for socialism in this period? Their primary problem is the dominant role in the world played by imperialism. And unless you understand that, not just you, Anthony, but I'm addressing your question, unless we all understand that and as the central problem facing us, and that necessitates alliances both inside particularly oppressed nations and nations subjected to neo-colonialism. It necessitates alliances with not just the small peasantry, but the medium peasantry, with the national bourgeois who are prepared to fight for the sovereignty and independence of a country, and to put together a coalition of those forces to resist US imperialism. That would be the priority and is the priority for a lot of the countries in South America. So Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua are doing that quite successfully. Brazil, bit of a mixed picture on that one. And Argentina, well, that's collapsed into out-and-out reaction now. But that's the reason why we criticize the Greek communists and their followers is precisely because they have lost sight of the big picture. And this has been happening for over 70 years now. Various communist parties chose to pursue a sectarian agenda and lost sight of the primary contradiction. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations made this mistake. Going all the way back to Khrushchev in 1956 with his disgraceful counter-revolutionary speech. This caused, of course, ultimately, the Albanians, for instance, to correctly criticize Khrushchev and choose ultimately to minimize relations with the USSR. Now, this also led to the Sino-Soviet split, where the Chinese party made a lot of very correct points about Soviet revisionism. But, again, there were problems in that stemmed from those splits. Like the Albanians made a mistake in the approach that they used. Hoxha was a very great revolutionary, but by essentially cutting off relations with the USSR, then later on, disastrously, cutting off relations with the Chinese, essentially left his country completely isolated and unprepared to face the wave of counter-revolution that followed. It doesn't minimize the greatness of the man and what was achieved by Albanian socialism, but these were mistakes. The theory of social imperialism, the theory that the Soviet Union had become an imperialist power after the rise of the Khrushchevite revisionists, this was a mistake. The mistake that the Chinese made, the mistake that the Albanians made. Interestingly enough, the Koreans kept open relations with everybody. The Koreans were always derided as sectarian lunatics, but they managed to keep relations open with the Soviets, the Chinese, and the Albanians all the way through this. So it was possible to do. The better thing, I think, and again, it's glorious to have hindsight, would have been to make full and frank criticisms of the line of the Soviet Party in private, which is what Mao was doing for a while. I mean, I read one source about the reason why Khrushchev had to agree to send in the tanks to crush the fascist uprising in Hungary in 1956 was partly because Mao was putting so much pressure on him privately, saying basically, unless you do this, you have basically secured the collapse of the revolution. And so that would have been the better option, I think, because what they didn't understand, I think, or didn't see correctly, was the fact that the struggle in the Soviet Party was still there, and that if international communists had been making their criticisms forcefully in private, it would have given some inspiration to the internal opposition inside the Soviet Party, as it was by the Chinese and then the Albanians both like turning their backs and walking away. And then in the case of the Chinese, making a dreadful ultra-leftist mistake and then declaring that the Soviet Union was the primary contradiction now, not US imperialism. Then again, a series of dreadful mistakes flowed from that. My point in all of this is that we don't just stand there advancing the most either like ultra-left slogan or, on the other side of things, a right opportunist slogan. Like what leads to splits and collapses and a failure to properly analyze a situation is dogmatism. And dogmatism can be of the left or it can be of the right. Now, Marxism, Leninism is meant to be a dynamic force, meaning that it, of course, is always adapting itself to the different circumstances. And that means that if you're just standing there repeating things you have learnt by rote over and over again and are not investigating the real conditions of the masses, if you're not investigating the actual situation on the ground, and if the party isn't connected with the masses and in continual interaction with them, then you're going to end up just putting forward like bizarre sounding slogans that might well be theoretically correct in certain other circumstances, but in the conditions we are in now, sound ludicrous and take us nowhere. And this is what's happened to a lot of the international communist movement. It's not about faith in the proletariat. It's about the fact that the communist parties do not have strong enough links to the proletariat and therefore haven't adjusted their program accordingly. If you look at Lenin, he was constantly adjusting in terms of his calculations because he was constantly investigating the real situation, as was Mao in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. But what Lenin never forgot, and what none of the great revolutionary leaders ever forgot, was the fact that the class struggle is central. And of course, as Mao pointed out, the class struggle continues long after the revolution. But how that struggle is conducted, in what form that the class struggle takes, what is the relationship of the Communist Party to the masses and to that struggle? How is the Communist Party participating in that struggle? All of these things have to be calculated and recalculated and calculated again, depending upon how the struggle is going. Is it in the case of where we stand, our case now, or where we stand right now? You have a case in multiple cases where the primary contradiction is the removal of neo-colonialism. So Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, all are participating in a process to rid themselves of the influence of neocolonialism. That's the primary contradiction facing them. And yes, we believe that that would be stronger with the mobilization of the masses, as Traore is trying to do in Burkina Faso. But it also means assisting in whatever small way we can the build-up of real communist forces in those countries and standing in solidarity with the revolutionary nationalists there in their struggle against both French and US imperialism. And again, I'll make this point. This is why Marxism-Leninism is not some ossified thing where you just repeat the same slogan over and over and over again. Because if you've done that, you've removed the science of you've removed all the vitality in life from the science of revolution. Greetings to Svetlana, who joins us from Moscow. Alan Smith said, I find it interesting that Chavez was supposedly an evil dictator, and yet during the coup attempt, it was his supporters who got gunned down in the streets. What a strange dictatorship. Indeed. Moving on. Rista Costadino says, Venezuela made a pretty good turn. It sort of became a bit of a joke that the least royal military in South America. But after the 2002 coup, they seem at least to be patriotic. Of course, there were purges. Moving on. Scrolling down the comments. Hello to Grassy Knoll, who's joined us from Seattle. Hello to Zouter, who joins us. Hello to Jenny, who's here. Good to have you with us. Irish Partisan says, Elon Musk criticizing socialism for problems in Venezuela while Musk's industries are being heavily subsidized by the US state is the height of irony. Well, this is what the point I was making earlier. Like, Musk is just acting in his class interests, you know? And all of the bourgeois, all of the top-ranking bourgeois, their interests are absolutely intertwined with the state because it's their state, you know? Elon, for all his talk about free enterprise, there's no such thing in the era of imperialism. We are in the era of imperialism, not free competition, as Lenin said. And that means that all these billionaires have their interests tied up in the actions of the US state. And so much for borderless capitalism. Abolish NATO said, what's the deal with the new Communist Party and the US Revolutionary Communists? Do we need another trot party? You don't, and they are essentially, their reorganization has been paid for by the state, I think. They suddenly pop up after years. I mean, the IMT, International Marxist Tendency in the United States, was tiny. They were slightly bigger in Canada, but the reason they turned up with this new branding and this new sort of mock Soviet aesthetic is precisely because the state required another fake communist party to scoop up, especially younger people who were going into opposition against capitalism. They need the trots to scoop them up and lead them absolutely nowhere, which is what the RCP is designed to do. I mean, I saw that march they had the other day. I don't know what context that was in, but it seemed like a march to nowhere, which is what Trotskyism is. It's a march to nowhere. Maria says National Bourgeois in Venezuela support PSUV as well. Andromeda Star says, is the ACP worth joining? But I've been thinking about it, but I have a lot of stuff going on in life at the moment. I meant to say the ACP. I would say it is worth joining. Having read what I've seen from it so far, which is that it is very solidly anti-imperialist and has all the right positions with regard to the international struggle. I believe they're going to be aligning with the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. So, I mean, if the recommendation of an Englishman means anything to you, fair son of the American Revolution, then I would say, yes, you should. This is, as I said on the stream the other day, it's very much a step in the right direction. And the only way that American imperialism is going to go down is if it's taken down from inside the imperial core. And that means you need a communist party in the United States worthy of the name. And until now, you haven't had one. You've had a state-controlled one in the form of the CPUSA. And then you have one that's now pro-Zionist in the form of the Party of Communists USA. And you have a bunch of irrelevant sectarian jokes. This is a chance at actually creating and growing a real communist party that could actually stand a chance of being rooted in the American working class. If I were American, I would join it. Marius says the same leftists who attacked Maduro for tolerating the bourgeois would scream their denunciation 10 times louder if he expropriated all the oligarchs. Well, yes, and also these same leftists, I'm thinking DSA creeps, side with the most repugnant parts of the American oligarchy. You know? And these are the same people who will tell you to vote for Biden, or they'll be telling you to vote for Kamala Harris a lot of the time, to stop fascism, don't you know? While screaming that Maduro is, a traitor because he has the PSUV has an alliance with the national bourgeois in Venezuela. They'll scream for a vote for Joe Biden or now Kamala Harris to stop fascism. These people are a joke. They're a joke. Their reaction to this is a joke. Their reaction to the launch of the ACP is a joke. I mean, I've seen whole essays denouncing the ACP based on the fact that based on like one comment on one stream that Has or Jackson Hinkle made. I mean, this isn't serious stuff. It's really not. You see, like, actually, I'll call up the email I got in a minute about the ACP because a listener asked an interesting question. You see, if your critique of the ACP is based on like a misinterpretation of like some comments that Has made on the stream, like 3 years ago or something. If you're writing a whole essay based on that, and based off that, you're going to call like the ACP fascist or something, then quite frankly, you're not a serious person. You're not. I know you think you're doing some sort of revolutionary act, but we all make mistakes. I've been open about mine, but check yourself seriously. If you're engaging in that kind of silliness, like just take a step out and observe what you're doing. Like, if you're using the word fascism or, another one I've seen is Strasserism. They're accusing like the ACP of like pushing the theories of Gregor and Otto Strasser, like the left wing of the Nazis. It's like, lads, the Nazis were a very out and proud imperialist movement. In fact, it was pretty much the center of piece of their ideology. Nazi fascist ideology in an imperialist country is built around an absolutely vehement and aggressive support for the most violent forms of imperialism. So how can it be then that you're a fascist or a Strasserist if you're a solid anti-imperialist, that you oppose US imperialism, that you oppose Zionism, you support countries that are in revolt against US imperialism? How does that make any sense? And don't try and tell me that Strasserism was actually anti-imperialist, because it wasn't. Okay? Strasserism was a derivation of social democracy in Germany, which had already become pro-imperialist. So if you wanted to form a sort of pseudo-fascist party in the United States, well, you don't need to bother. You've already got the DSA. They're already the left flank of what would be US fascism. So why bother forming a new party? You've got about 10 to choose from. Social Democrats and Trots. This is ridiculous. These people who are making these criticisms need to grow up. Stop being silly. Step out of your online cliques, for God's sake. Right. Otis says CPGBML. Thumbs up. Exactly right. Alan Smith says, for the Venezuelan communists to come out against Maduro right now is pure treason in a real material way. And Alan is correct. Have you seen South of the Border by Oliver Stone, and what do you think of it? I haven't seen it. I will have to check it out. Comrade Naylor joins us. Good to have you with us. Just moving down. Almir says, Mao was a great communist, but he could be an ultra-leftist at times. That's why he made real mistakes. All great leaders make mistakes. This isn't, these are men. They're not, they're not divine beings, but then again, it depends on what your definition of a divine being is, isn't it? Are we going with um, the Abrahamic definition, or are we going with the more classical Greek and Roman definition? Because I suppose divine beings in the Greek and Roman tales not only made mistakes, but were accurate, were more or less accurate reflections of the upper classes of those particular systems. In that they were petty, jealous, vengeful, and often made earth-moving decisions, quite literally, for the smallest and crudest of reasons. That was the portrayal of the gods, as I read it in Greek mythology. But I take your point. T.G. Wilson asks, would be interested to hear your thoughts on the extent to which there is an ML foundation within resistance movements. Yes. Now, this is a very interesting point. I mean, I think perhaps this might be a way to talk about Iran and Hezbollah. So, T.G. Wilson, I will highlight your question on the bottom of the screen and come back to it. Anthony, were you satisfied with the answer? If you were, you seem to indicate that you were. Good to hear. Mr. Chopin says, U.S. mainstream media is using old footage from 2017 and 19 to pretend the anti-Maduro protests are bigger than they are. Corporate media did the same thing at the beginning of the SMO in Ukraine. Well, they're only lying to themselves at this stage. Again, the Venezuelan government seemed pretty well prepared for this. This is they're only now lying to themselves, as they've been lying to themselves for 2 years, probably longer, about the Russians are going to lose, the Chinese economy's on its last legs, trust us, this time it's all going to fall apart. But what all of this ultimately comes down to is a refusal to face reality. They are, well, for some of them at least in the ruling class, they're desperate for all of their coup plotting and sanctions wars and counter-revolution attempts to work, precisely because they know they can't fight any other way now. And again, we'll come back to this when we discuss Iran in a minute. Alan Smith says, the inclusion of people in the ACP, of people who've said fucked up things about homeless people and Starbucks workers, gives me pause. I will just now on the homeless people thing. I've seen that comment. I think that was pretty obviously a joke. I'm not saying it was a good one, but it seems to me to have been a joke. On the Starbucks thing, yeah, I disagree with what Has said. But my point in response to you, Alan, would be, yeah, you disagree with Has about that. Okay, well, does that mean then that the entire project is not worthy of attention? That it isn't a step forward? I mean, look, you're going. I'm assuming you are a citizen of the United States, judging by your comments. You're going from a situation where the only communist parties in the United States for 70 years have been like the CPUSA, which was purged, banned, its leaders imprisoned, and then its internal regime became revisionist after 56, and then it went into a long period of decline and was pretty much over as a threat to the American state probably by the 60s. You have had the Avakian cult, which started out as an attempt at a real workers' organization when it was the Revolutionary Union, and then due to one thing and another, it became the Avakian cult and became completely useless. You've got party of you got the PSL, which is a trot organization which LARPs as Marxist-Leninist and has a diabolically bad theoretical level, whose cadre seem to be obsessed with putting on drag shows. That seems to be the main focus of their activity at the moment. My point is, if you've got points of disagreement with some of the individuals who founded the ACP, that's probably inevitable given the state of things at the moment. But I would ask you to examine this question yourself. Take a look at the political position you are in as workers in the United States right now. Does the formation of the ACP represent a potential step forward for the bringing about of a communist party as a militant workers' organization? In my judgment, again, sitting outside of the United States, it takes a step towards that, and a very important one. So I would just simply say to you that examine the whole picture here. Just as we always say on this program, examine the total set of relations involved, not what has or Hinkle or whatever individuals you might have some disagreements with said or published or put out there, or things that they've done, people that they've spoke to. Ask yourself if this is a step forward and if this is a big step in the right direction. I would say it is, but only you can make your own examination. I would just simply say that you should make a re-examination based on your experience of what the class struggle looks like to you in the United States right now, and ask yourself the question: is this a step forward? Hero Protagonist says, seems to me communists talk more about imperialism abroad than class exploitation at home, and this is why they don't raise class consciousness. Well, that's an interesting point. You know what? I think that, well, this is an accusation that gets brought up. I mean, I'd say that for us, we balance it out. What we try and do is to try and make clear to the working class why that none of the electoral options presented to them in Britain are worthy of support, why they can't vote their way to socialism. And a big part of that is imperialism and in understanding it. And yeah, we do talk a lot about it, and we're not going to apologize or change on that front, because we also talk a lot about the exploitation of the working class domestically and why the two are linked together. There's no dividing wall between the two. Imperialism is a system which drains resources out of the home country now, concentrates them in tiny islands of wealth in places like the City of London or tax havens, and is only going to lead to the impoverishment of the domestic working class, just as it's only going to lead to the enslavement of the working class and peasantry overseas. The whole system is interconnected, and we only liberate ourselves if we make proper solidarity and alliances with the oppressed of the world. And that is the way in which liberation can be secured. So that's why we talk about it a lot. Right. Alan says, I have ultra-left instincts, which I have to constantly question. Well, I'd say that is good that you're aware of those. Look, we all come with, especially in the imperialist states, we all come with our set of mistakes that we've made. I've gone through very ultra-left phases. I was in a Trotskyite organization for 6 years, for God's sake. I was a Trotskyite until a couple of years ago. So, like, we all have these mistakes that we have made. The question is, as you appear to be addressing, which is that are we aware of these, and are we questioning why we have a particular reaction to certain things? And through self-examination, we can identify that. But also, I would say the value of the ACP can also be that you can now, if you're in an area with a few of you, start to potentially build branches where you can, I know a lot of American comrades out there feel, and indeed are, rather isolated. But if you could get together with comrades in your locality to just form a reading group and discussion and have regular discussions with each other, this is a huge step forward in terms of also understanding your own politics and helping to develop that, and also helping to develop others through discussion. So again, I would say it's an opportunity. Yes, Anthony, it is dynamism versus dogmatism. That is exactly right. Just scrolling down. Yep, X has joined us and says, Viva Venezuela. That's excellent. Grassy Null says, the AFL-CIO purged most of the real left out of the Labour movement. That's true. Hello to Potted Rodent, who's here with us. Well, to answer Cognito's point, if the position that you're taking is that Russia is imperialist, you are, as in the KKE stance, you're misleading the working class. And yes, the KKE engage in a lot of anti-NATO attacks, but they are still fundamentally misleading the Greek working class by putting Russia on the same level as, or saying that they're a slightly lower form of imperialism than the United States, the US ruling class. And if you're misleading the working class on something as fundamental as that, then you're aiding imperialism because you're not educating the working class in the proper way and allowing them to see the facts of the situation. That's what's going on inside inside Greece, is that you have a party with major influence in the Greek working class giving an incorrect position to them. And if you're misleading the working class, you stand no chance of actually affecting real and positive change, even with all the anti-NATO positions that they take. If you're not giving a correct view of what imperialism is, then all that anti-NATO posturing is completely useless. Yes, Yepex, I got your you got your image on the about the ACP. I will come to that tomorrow. Hero says you are frustrated that class consciousness is so low. We all are. Probably something to discuss in a future stream. Most definitely. D. Russell Moros says Hinkle is the face of so-called MAGA communism. Well, from what I can tell, this MAGA communism thing was essentially an experiment run by Has and others that's now largely been brought to a close. It was an attempt to reach workers who were engaged with or who were attracted to the Trump phenomenon. It's now something which is now they're moving in a different direction or another direction with the ACP. So I would say it's that was a phase which is now past. And again, like I agree with Marius's point, it's like stop obsessing over Jackson fucking Hinkle. Like, look, I think the guy does some good things. He's said some ludicrous things that I've criticized before. But again, it's not a one-man band. It's not the Jackson Hinkle party, nor is it just the Has party, nor is it just the Midwestern Marx party. It's the American Communist Party, or at least it aspires to be. And so see it in that way. Like, see it for the opportunity that it is, and stop obsessing with online personalities. Maybe Hinkle will turn out to play a really positive role. Maybe he won't. But again, it is about so much more than him or any of the individuals who are the founding members of this. It is so much bigger than all of them as individuals, and most of them, I think, would probably agree with that. Right. So to answer T.G. Wilson's point, we'll be interested to hear your thoughts on the extent there is an ML foundation within the resistance movements. Right. So I will answer that point as part of the discussion on what's happened in Iran and other places over the last few hours, which is that the head of the Hamas Politburo, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran, where he was attending the inauguration of new President Masoud Pezeshkian. And then just before that, the Israelis leveled a tower block, it seems, or a residential block in Beirut, trying to get a Hezbollah leader. They've also assassinated via an air raid a Hezbollah commander named Al-Haj Mohsen. And there's talk of them also assassinating an IRGC commander in an air raid on Damascus. So a lot going on. This is at the same time, of course, as the Israeli Knesset is seriously debating the right of their soldiers to torture and rape prisoners. And there was a pro-rape demonstration, mass pro-rape demonstrations breaking out inside Israel itself. According to reports from Mondo Vice, a very good website, which I would recommend everybody check out, the Israeli economy and state is starting to seriously come under strain. Netanyahu and his government appear to be splitting apart and losing control of the country. They keep threatening war with Hezbollah, but can't seem to go through with it. So why did they kill Haniyeh? They killed Haniyeh because Netanyahu needed to reassert himself. That's why. Because they cannot believe, that certainly this would have been, of course, planned by the United States, or at least the United States would have signed off on it, because the Israelis wouldn't have done it without the backing of the United States. They're not that brave. The killing of Haniyeh is motivated by Netanyahu's desire to try and look as if he's winning something. Haniyeh's role in the war is minimal, if he had one at all. By the accounts of those on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, the Qatar-based leadership of Hamas had little or, in fact, no knowledge of October the 7th, of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. This was all planned within Gaza, and they didn't even tell the senior Hamas leaders that it was going ahead, because security needed to be that tight. So it was the resistance factions in Gaza that planned it and executed it. Haniyeh had very little or nothing to do with it, I would say. In terms of practical planning, nothing to do with it. It probably caught him as much by surprise as it did Netanyahu. So given that he has no role in the day-to-day fight, and his principal role was as one of the people that were leading negotiations, Israel just killed one of the negotiators who they were supposedly bargaining with, in a desperate move by Netanyahu to reassert himself. And it's a move that's not going to work. If anything, what they've done is they've made their own situation objectively worse. They have enraged the people of Iran. I would say even the people who voted for Pezeshkian, well, many of them will be, despite having some opinions that are against elements of the Islamic Revolution, the overwhelming feeling in Iran is one that rejects foreign interference, that rejects Israel, that rejects US imperialism. Even amongst elements in the bourgeois, there is at least a strong national bourgeois in Iran. So, if anything, the anti-US and anti-Israel feeling inside Iran will have only been strengthened by this grotesque violation of Iranian sovereignty. Apparently, a response is being planned. Of course, this is the responsibility of Ayatollah Khamenei and the IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they responded with pinpoint strikes on Israeli military facilities after the bombing of their consulate in Damascus. They'll respond again to this, I'm sure, at some point soon. This is all desperate moves by Netanyahu. Again, the Israeli economy is falling to pieces. What's been revealed is just how artificial and how dependent upon the US imperialists the Israeli economy truly is. The very effective nature of the Ansar Allah led naval blockade on Israel, at least the southern ports of Israel, and the radicalizing effect that the last 8 months have had upon the masses, not just in occupied Palestine, but all the way across West Asia, including in Iran itself, in Lebanon, in Jordan, where the Jordanian king's rule is looking increasingly shaky these days. So what's happened is, and just to go back to Iran for a second, this is not, assassinating someone inside Iran is not new business for the US or the Israelis. I mean, there's a lot of stories going around about who might have killed President Raisi. More on that in future episodes as it becomes clearer. But the masses in Iran, it seems to me, are certainly rallying to the cause of the defense of the revolution against the foreign enemy. It's going to make any attempt that the backers of Pezeshkian might have wanted to make to normalize or to find a deal with the US almost impossible. So that's been cut off. Now the only way for Iran is east. It probably was anyway. I really don't think that even if Harris won the US presidential election, that there would have not been another Iran deal. Things are too far gone now. In Lebanon, this is the heroic actions of Hezbollah as a national liberation force, and the bombing of Beirut by the Israelis has rallied more and more of the masses behind Hezbollah and its associated forces. Remember, Hezbollah, of course, is predominantly a Shia organization. but they have a much wider group which is open to non-Shia and non-Muslims. It includes a lot of Lebanese Christians now. So Hezbollah is more and more becoming I would say, a unified national liberation force. So everything the Israelis and US imperialists have done is only strengthened the national liberation forces across the region over the last 8 months now. And they're continuing to strengthen them by lashing out all over the place. Netanyahu is finished. He's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he makes peace now, he'll have to flee the country because there's a good chance that the fascist mobs roving around inside Israel would demand his head. As I said on Telegram, he is now in the same position that Zelensky is in. If he goes backward, he's fucked. If he goes forward, he's fucked. He can't get out. If he makes peace, there's many characters inside Israel who will regard him as a traitor and would want to off him. If he doesn't, then Israel will go down to defeat. The economy will collapse, and there'll be nothing the US imperialists can do to save them. And everybody in the resistance factions knows this. So to answer T.G. Wilson's point about Marxist-Leninist elements in the resistance forces, I've read accounts that say that the leadership of Hezbollah and indeed the cadres of Hezbollah and now the fighting forces of Hamas have all read the works of people like Frantz Fanon, have read the works of apparently people like Sartre and a lot of the other anti-colonial revolutionaries of the post-1945 period. Also, apparently the Hamas leaders in Gaza are very well read when it comes to the literature that's produced inside Israel itself. Many of them speak Hebrew because they spent so many years in Israeli prisons. They understand and have studied the culture of Israel, and this is why they designed the assault on October the 7th in the way that they did. They anticipated what this would do to Israeli society because I think they've certainly studied Fanon, and I think they have studied. I think there's a lot of study of Mao on guerrilla warfare in Hezbollah and Hamas circles. And they also, of course, come from or influenced by, certainly Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolution, which had in its roots elements of Marxism, Leninism that were weaved into Shia theology, I think, using the right terms there, which was done by Shia thinkers like Ali Shariati and others. So certainly the Marxist-Leninist influence in a lot of these revolutionary processes is there, even if Marxist parties in these places were either not present or have been eroded over time in various revolutions and counter-revolutions. So yes, I'd say the presence there. The presence is there through the influence of successful revolutions of the past. And certainly with regard to Hamas, they've become, over time, much more like a unifying national liberation force than they initially were. As Fatah and the PLO got more corrupt and more useless, and Hamas took over rule of the Gaza Strip, they became much more like a national liberation force that might have emerged like post-1945, and much less like, much further away from their more reactionary origins in the Muslim Brotherhood. Events, law of constant motion applies here to these organizations, because Hamas is an organization which was obliged to take on a mass role, which was obliged to actually work with the masses and build resistance among them. That changed the nature of Hamas in Gaza, away from what it was towards its more, I would say, more revolutionary nature now. Nothing remains the same through the struggle. If they would remain the same as they were in 1988, they wouldn't be in the position that they are in now. So to go back to the assassination of Haniyeh, it won't have any impact, I don't think, on the on the operations in Gaza. The Hamas fighters and others will salute his martyrdom, and then we'll continue the struggle. And the Israelis will continue to sink in the bloody swamp that they have created. So, right, I'm just going to go through some more questions here. Right. Anthony says it would be good to hear analysis of the Czech Velvet Revolution sometime. Well, sometime soon you will, Anthony. I'll put it on the list. Did I discuss the relationship between Venezuela and Iran? YepX asks. Yes, I did, earlier on in the stream. Alan says I could make peace with the ACP if the positions are good, and I've said stupid things in my past as well. We all have. The only reason I get away with it is because I said stupid things in the dim and distant past on message boards, of all things. This was the pre-YouTube era where I was saying stupid things. I doubt that those things exist anymore. They're probably on an old message board on the old Urban 75 site, if anybody remembers that one. Right. Cognito is having an argument about the nature of the KKE with Marius and says, they express solidarity, that's the KKE, with the people of Ukraine, not the government, who are victims of an ongoing war. They strongly oppose any military help to Ukraine and call its government reactionary. And yet they consistently mislead Greek workers about the nature of imperialism. Their pyramid of imperialism theory is garbage. And they mislead about the nature of the government in Russia and the nature of the system in Russia. They are misleading the Greek working class. And so anything that they do with regard to posturing about opposing NATO is rendered worthless because they have made such a fundamental error, which they refuse to correct, with regard to calling Russia imperialist and saying it's an inter-imperialist war. Everything else that they do is rendered useless by that massive mistake, which they keep compounding by doubling down on. T.G. Wilson says, also Hezbollah grew out of the Amal party in the 1970s, which came from the Lebanese Communist Party in the 1940s. Interesting point. Thanks for adding that in, mate. Harold says, as Che Guevara said anecdotally, as he was about to be killed, you are only killing one man, i.e. not the revolution. Jerry says, I forgot to revisit it, but saw that the IDF scumbag who commanded on 7th attempt since some atrocity I forget has been given command of Gaza. Well, with any luck, he will meet his defeat there. Amal from Arabic means party of the oppressed. Interesting. Hero protagonist says, that's the thing about wokeism, the total lack of forgiveness. Yes. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our time for this evening. We will return tomorrow to talk either more about this, more about... We have an interesting... YepX has sent me an interesting graphic, which I want to share with you all tomorrow about the ACP. I know we're talking a lot about this, but it is a significant development inside the United States, where I will talk through the various memes that are being sent around about the ACP and talk about how most of them are bullshit. We will be covering such subjects as LaRoucheism, whatever that is. I know what it is. I just wish I didn't. Duginism, whatever that is. Browderism, all the isms. Tomorrow, here, live at 7:30. Please join me for that. But until then, thanks to everybody who's watching tonight. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Patreon shows had to be rearranged because I had a lot of writing to do over the last few days. They're going to be taking place next week. But I'll be back with you again tomorrow to discuss all of this, plus J.D. Vance on family values and how you can't have family values if you support capitalism. Thank you, everybody, and good night.